Okay. Thank you, Bav, for introducing the talk. So, yeah, I'm Ruth Beale. I'm an artist, and I've been working on a commission with Manchester of the Future for nearly 2 years now. And a big part of this has been working with prisoners at HMP Lincoln. The whole commission was called The Free and the Unfree, and my initial brief was to work with communities in Lincoln. I'm just going to give a sort of brief introduction to what I did before I hand over to the panelists. I mean, the whole programme in Manchester of the Future was really framed around thinking about power and freedom and democracy. So one of the first things I did was start having conversations with people about this idea of freedom and thinking about Lincoln as a city and its identity. And one of the things that really struck was that there's a castle, which is this very strong image of power, but there's also 3 prisons. There's a working prison, HMP Lincoln, there's a museum prison in the castle, and there's what's currently an immigration removal centre, Warden Hall, just outside. It's going to become a prison again soon. So that seemed to me like quite a strong sense of, you know, how this identity came together. And with this brief of thinking about working in communities, I thought, well, I'd really like to work with prisoners in the prison. So in a way, it's quite an unusual project in a prison, and it's not led by a charity or organisation. You know, this was an approach by me and Kerry Campbell, the director of Manchester of the Future, to the prison to say, can we do this? And you know, that took some time, and over some time we sort of negotiated about what we could do. And I'd identified that I wanted to make a radio play, and I was partly because I'd become really interested in national prison radio. So that's really a great privilege to have Andrew and Ali here tonight. And what an amazing medium that is for getting, you know, some creative output for week's workshop to prisoners all over the country. So we made this proposal, and we had to be very kind of clear and transparent about what we were going to do. We did a call out to prisoners, you know, leaflets through cell doors and adverts on Way Out TV, which is what they have in their cells. And we got a group that signed up, and the whole thing was sort of treated as a course. So that I find that quite interesting, you know, how this fitted into the institution of the prison, and it fitted into the way that they do education, and this program they have called Rehabilitative Culture, which is all about sort of changing the culture of prisons. All of these things, you know, contentious in themselves and interesting, and we can discuss more. But what I did was work with a drama therapist to do a week of workshops with the ambition of making a script for the play in a week. So we used resources and world building and talking about things in the news and building up a kind of dynamic together to work together, building up to role play so that we were writing scenes and constructing this whole narrative and using sci-fi as a medium. So that's kind of another really important element of the project that I did, was to use this medium of sci-fi to think about the future, think about possible futures, and the, you know, to use that as a medium to think about these themes of power and freedom and democracy. So we made the script, we had this complete script in a week, and then I went away after that and produced it. So worked with a dramaturg and actors, did a call out for actors in Lincoln, worked with a sound designer. But you know, in the midst of this, coronavirus happened, so the production had to happen remotely. But you know, it did get done, and then we have this amazing outcome, Project Zed, which is a half-hour radio drama, which was premiered on National Prison Radio, which is a kind of extraordinary tale of this eco-conspiracy with these other layers about imprisonment and kind of steps of imprisonment from the personal to societal. Yeah, I suppose the last thing I just want to say about it is maybe there's some things here that we can unpick tonight about these kind of ways of working with prisoners, and how there's so much to consider in terms of kind of responsibility, transparency, how you collaborate, how things are credited. I mean, I was talking to somebody yesterday about how I almost feel it would be impossible to do a sort of socially engaged, open-ended project in prison, because it feels like everything has to be very decided and ordered and planned. So that's one of the things that kind of framed how we did it. That always had this outcome, but that's also one of the things that made it great to be able to work with a group of people and then make this professionally produced outcome that they then heard their script being communicated in that way. It's on SoundCloud now, and there's a link on the Mansions of the Future website if anyone hasn't heard it yet. The other thing that the whole thing's been a huge learning experience for me, and I think part of my practice is about learning with other people. I had never written a radio drama before, so I was doing that with a group of people together. And then I don't have lived experience of incarceration. I'd never been in a prison before, so it's kind of crash course in learning about the criminal justice system and people's experiences of prison, and then beyond that, the kind of politics of incarceration, and then how arts operate in prison. So tonight it's really great to have an opportunity to talk about arts, education and agency in prison, and hear more about some of these other brilliant organisations and projects that are happening. So I'm really happy to be joined by Andrew Wilkie and Ahmed and Fiona Curran. So thank you very much. And I'm going to pass on first over to Andrew to hear more about National Prison Radio.
Thanks, Ruth. And the drama is well worth a listen if you haven't heard it. And also, there was Ruth did an interview on Radio 4 on Front Row a couple of weeks ago, which I thought was a really good summary of kind of the challenges of working in prison and kind of and what it's all about for the uninitiated. So I'd recommend digging that out as well. It was a couple of weeks ago on Front Row. I work for the Prison Radio Association. We're a charity. We set up and run National Prison Radio. I joined in 2007, just when the charity was in the first couple of months of its existence. And my job was to go into the old library in Brixton Prison. Just to give you an idea of how prisons work, 13 years later, that room is not referred to as the radio station. It's still referred to as the old library. So it's kind of, prisons are a very, things don't move very quickly in prisons. And I always think that that's hilarious that the officers just still think of it as the old library, despite the fact that we've very much been in the building for 13 years. Anyway, we set up a radio studio in there. We started broadcasting onto the wings of Brixton Prison, and then we worked with the Ministry of Justice to make that radio station available in prisons across the country. So we broadcast across England and Wales. We're in over 100 prisons. There are only a handful of prisons we're not in. So we have a potential audience of around about 82,000. It's probably slightly lower now, actually, because the prison population is down at the moment. So we have pretty good reach. I'm going to share my screen, and I will show you our broadcast schedule. I don't know if you can see that because there's quite a lot of small text on there, but if you can't, get hold of a copy of Inside Time newspaper, which is the monthly newspaper that's distributed around prisons. They've got a website, it's called Inside Time, and that our schedule always appears on the back page, so you can see that on the back page. But this kind of gives you an idea of the sorts of things we broadcast. So in normal times, the vast majority of our content is produced in prisons, presented by our workforce from the wings, and we have a staff team of professional producers who kind of provide production support. Sometimes they co-present, sometimes staff will present on their own. We have to be quite fluid because of the chaotic nature of prisons. One day our breakfast show presenter might not be released from the wing, and so we've got to find a stand-in. And this schedule that you can see is the busiest schedule we've ever created, really. And since, I'm sure we're going to talk about what things have been like over the past few months, one of the things that we've done is ramp up the amount of content that we've put out, and we've had to be quite imaginative about where we get that content from, and how we make sure that we are kind of providing a service that's entertaining, that's relevant, that's credible. We don't just put anything on the radio, and as far as possible, it's our own productions, and most of the programs are our own productions. But you'll see there at 10 a.m. every day, Monday to Friday, we've been broadcasting the BBC's newscast podcast, which was for several months dominated by news around coronavirus, and so we really wanted to make sure that people were getting access to good quality, accurate information about what's going on in the outside world. We also broadcast a couple of minute long news bulletin at the top of each hour, which comes from IRN, Independent Radio News. They provide news bulletins to lots of radio stations around the country. So there's a bit of content that comes from outside. There's some partnership content in there as well. So Penguin, for example, we teamed up with them during the lockdown. But most of the programs are produced by us and geared towards reducing reoffending. So as a charity, our key driver in all of our programming is reducing reoffending. And they're not really talked about very much anymore, but when we first started working in this area, the Ministry of Justice had what they called the 7 pathways of reducing reoffending. So these are 7 big themes that will commonly reduce a person's risk of reoffending once they've been released. So they're things like, common sense things, really. So kind of health and addiction issues in particular, money issues, accommodation, education, family contact. That's a big one. And so whenever we put something on the air, the question that we ask ourselves is, does it tie into one or more of those pathways to reducing reoffending? So even something as kind of innocuous sounding as the request show, which is literally big up my mate John on D-Wing, there's a two days a week, that's a family and friends request show. So we take requests from people on the outside, they contact us, they leave messages, they request songs, and we've kind of built our community, our prison radio community, around those sorts of shows. And then of course we've got NPR Talk, which is all those programs in red, which are that's kind of where we put most of our resources, and those programs are broadcast at key listening times. So at the end of the working day, normally people in prison are working during the day, or they should be, or in education, not at the moment. So at the end of the day, meals have been served, 6 o'clock. That's a time when a lot of people are on the wing, in their cells. And then at 7 to 9 o'clock, which of course is kind of peak TV time, we're up against EastEnders and that sort of thing. We put our crowd pleaser stuff like the request show. Midday is lunchtime. That's staff break off. So there are no staff around. Everyone's locked up. So we put our key programs there. And then obviously at the weekends as well, when there are fewer activities going on. So that in a nutshell really is what National Prison Radio does. You're going to hear from Ali in a minute, who was one of our presenters in Brixton, so he can kind of give you the other side of it. But yeah, that's me.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you all. My name is Ali Ahmed. I'm from East London, and basically I am a music producer / sound producer, and I've been doing a lot of work with national prison radio, both outside of prison and also inside prison, where I first got introduced to them. Basically, in the year 2015, I was in HMP Brixton prison, serving some time, and I was aware of National Prison Radio before I went there, but by chance I ended up getting moved to Brixton, which is the home of National Prison Radio. So when I got there and I found out that there was an opportunity for me to actually work for the NPR team and actually kind of get involved in the ins and outs of it, rather than just listening to it, I took it as a blessing. I was really excited by it. I was already producing music outside of prison before I went to prison, so it was just right up my alley, and it was like a really great opportunity. So when I did get to Brixton, and I eventually came to the point where I could work for NPR, I'd done a radio production course first before I joined the NPR team, which kind of just familiarized me with what we was going to do, and what is kind of necessary if you was working in a radio station. So it got me kind of used to what I was going to be involved in. So I done the course, and I finally I got accepted into NPR, which was really good. It was like if I was not in prison, it would be like one of my dream kind of jobs to be involved in anything to do with the music industry and the radio industry. Where it comes to radio production, it's very similar to music production. It's pretty much the same thing. You're producing sounds and things that other people listen to. So when I got into the NPR team, I luckily when I got there, there was a slot to host the Urban Show, which is one of the most listened. I think it was actually the most popular show on NPR. So when I got there and I saw the opportunity to host that, I jumped to it. It's my preferred genre of music, urban music, which it was basically hip hop, R&B, grime, just basically urban music. So I jumped to the opportunity, and I basically hosted the show and also done the production for the show. And yeah, I had a really good time there. It really helped with my mind state and passing time while I was in there. And I learned so many things that, to be honest, I don't think I would have had the opportunity to learn them kind of things if I didn't end up going through the circumstances that I went through. So it was kind of a blessing in disguise. And yeah, I learned all the ins and outs of what it takes to host a show for NPR, and just to host a show for radio in general. And yeah, I had a really good time with them. And when I did finally leave prison, I continued working with them, and it opened up loads of opportunities for me as well in terms of just getting my foot into the industry. So yeah, I've continued working with them since I've been out. I've been doing projects with them, and even though I'm not in prison anymore, I've got a lot of production that I've done for MTI, which is still getting broadcasted to all the prisoners. Yeah, that's pretty much like a brief introduction to me.
Thanks so much, Ali. Maybe Fiona, you want to go next? And then we can jump into questions.
Yeah. I'm Fiona. I'm the Director of Arts at Koestler Arts. So we're a prison arts charity that's been going since 1962, and I've been at Koestler for about 11 years. We're one of many prison arts charities in the sector, but we work across the whole of the UK. And there's about 12 staff members at Koestler. It's quite small, but we do sometimes expand a little bit when we take on temporary staff, but it's quite a small team. We encourage people to participate, people in the criminal justice system, to participate in the arts. So that includes, we're open to people entering our annual awards program from prisons, from forensic secure hospitals, youth offending teams, people who are on probation, all different areas across the sector. And we aim to share that work with the public. So that could be with the families of prisoners or other people involved in the criminal justice system, but also policymakers. But generally, the work's fantastic, and we want to share the artwork with as many people as possible in the outside world. So we do that through exhibitions and events, sometimes publications. So basically there's about 5 kind of strands to what we do, which is a rewards program, which is annual. We write feedback on work. So if we receive a submission at this, last year, 2019, when we received a submission, almost every submission should have got a piece of written feedback, whether it won an award or not. We run a mentoring program for people who want to continue in the arts. That's in England and Wales, for people who want to continue in the arts after release from prison. Exhibitions and events, that's kind of what we do, more public facing. And we also can sell work for people on their behalf, so visual artwork that's been produced in prisons. And I think we're quite known for the visual arts, but our biggest awards category, we have 52 categories of award, 52 art forms. The most popular one is actually poetry. So we get hundreds of poems, I think we get about 1,000 poems actually every year submitted from all over the UK. And yeah, so we have writing categories, music categories, spoken word categories, visual arts categories, and design and craft and applied arts. So we actually have a hair and beauty category. Some people do amazing kind of costume style hair and nails, for example. So yeah, we just get this huge outpouring of creativity. Our awards are kind of the anchor for what we do. They have an annual deadline, which is in the spring every year. And from that, there's lots of other opportunities that people can get involved in. As I said, we're really small. So we work with loads and loads of organizations. Like some of those are charities, some of those are not, who work in prisons, or arts organizations who don't necessarily work in prison. So we partner up a lot in order to be able to do more than such a small organization should be able to. So in the past, I've definitely worked with Prison Radio to try and get some of our projects shown or listened to, experienced within prisons. And also some of the stories of some of our participants have been shared through Prison Radio, for example. And we also work with people like Prison Radio, Way Out TV, which is a TV station in prisons, and the prison service have various types of in-cell information, lots and lots of different types. So we work with use all those methods to try and reach people. So prisoners are, I'm sure many of you know, prisoners are, of course, being creative in lots and lots and lots of different ways, in lots of different settings, sometimes completely independently, sometimes encouraged by education staff in prison, sometimes encouraged by family or friends. So many ways that people can be creative in prisons, and if people want to share it, that's what we encourage them to do, basically. Yeah, so wonderful job actually, because I do get to see just this huge diverse range of voices and stories, and we try our best to, especially in recent years, to think about how we present those stories, who presents them, who decides how they should be presented, or what we might do with them. We receive so much work that every time we present it to the public, whether it's an event or a book or an exhibition, it will have been selected down, it will have been curated all the time, because to make it a manageable amount for people to experience. So we spend quite a lot of time, and we've experimented a lot with who tells those stories and who we work with, and also kind of who might produce materials that we can send into prisons, or who represents us, or represents people's stories when visitors attend exhibitions. So yeah. Thanks,
Fiona. Thanks for all the introductions. There was actually something that Ali was saying that is formulating a question in my head, particularly around sort of like urban music or urban culture, rap and grime sort of things. But I'll move on to that a little bit later. First question I sort of wanted to open up to Fiona and Andrew as more like the organizational bodies in each of your institutions, about how do you approach your collaborators or prisoners, or is it more or less work in the reverse, as in they hear about you and then come to you?
Well, it's a combination, really. Sometimes people ask for a transfer to Brixton or Style. We also work in Style Prison, which is a women's prison near Manchester. Sometimes people ask for a transfer because they want to work with us. Quite commonly, we will go out onto the wings and recruit, and we're a workplace. We're not an education provider, and we're not a training provider. We're a workplace, and that's quite an important distinction in prisons. So we don't deliver qualifications. We're there to run a service, and our team from the wings do that work and run that service, supported by our staff. So we have we'll do job interviews like you normally would have a job interview. A couple of our staff will ask a set of questions to people, and as vacancies become available, we allocate people to workplaces. And then, I mean, what Ali said there about his music taste, for example, and that there was an opportunity there to present that program. Equally, if someone comes to us with a particular interest or a particular knowledge or a particular skill, we will try to find a home for that in our schedule. So our schedule changes quite a lot, and it's very much directed by whoever we're working with at the time. We work with a very small number of people overall, so we have up to 7 in Brixton at a time, and we have 2 or 3 in Style. It's much smaller project, so it's a relatively small team. But yeah, the audience and our workforce absolutely drive what we do, a large proportion of what we do.
And Koestler is also a combination. So, for example, how do we get people to enter the Koestler Awards, which I suppose is the backbone of what we do every year? How do we reach people? We do as much as we possibly can, and every year we find something new. So we might place adverts. So we'll place an advert with Prison Radio, and that'll go out saying something like, "Are you being creative? Do you want to share your work? This is a way you can do it." We place adverts with people like Prison Radio, Way Out TV. We do loads and loads of paper print, because prisons becoming a little bit better, but basically prisons are all about paper and post. So we loads of posters, lots of flyers, lots of just letters, pieces of paper going out to entrants who've entered before. We often ask them to take flyers and pass them to people who they also see being creative. We put flyers in the canteen flyer, which in the spring, which is something that prisoners will, almost every prisoner will be able to get when they get their things that they've purchased from the canteen. We work loads with the so I think every prison has an education provider. These are usually colleges. So we try to keep quite good links with the people who work for the colleges. So the art teachers, the librarians, English teachers, hair and beauty teachers, so that they can encourage people to participate if they think it'd be right for them. And so that's how we encourage people to enter the awards. And then when we do other projects, so for example, we have an employment project, usually, unfortunately it's not going to run in 2020, but we usually have an employment project at the South Bank Centre. So we look to recruit people who've got very recent experience of being in prison to come and work for us for the exhibition duration down at South Bank. That's an advert that goes out like basically as a job, and like Andrew, we interview for that job. Those are people who are in the community, but one of the desired characteristics is that they have recently been out released from prison. If we do a project, we do not do workshops usually in prisons, but occasionally we will do a project in a prison, or with a youth offending team or a probation team. So if we do that, we'll work closely with the probation service or with the youth offending service in order to try and find people who would benefit and who would really like to take part in a project. We have a mentoring program, which we ask entrants to tell us, we give them information about it, which is all sent out in the post. And people who would like to take part in that are asked to sign a form, send it back to us, and then we can take their application further. So that we ask people to put themselves forward, but we ask people in as many ways as possible. And there's different levels of engagement depending on how much someone wants to get engaged or the situation that someone's in.
Thanks. Can I ask a question about, in reaction to what some of you have said about audiences? Because like Fiona, you've brought up some issues about like how you mediate that the creative output, the artwork, with audiences, and who gets to tell those stories, but there's also something about you know, in a way, like sharing that is the point of it, isn't it? But then you want to be careful about not kind of othering prisoners and sort of making it kind of just about that subject. But then, like Andrew, I find it really interesting with National Prison Radio that the audience is people in prison, and that's everything that it's tailored for. And that's also very interesting. But then, as I understand it, you often can't share the programs that you make outside of prison because of sensitivities around, you know, the voices of prisoners elsewhere. And then, if we're still on this subject, Ali, I was thinking, like, how important was it for you when you were working in radio to be thinking about, you know, who's hearing it and the fact it's getting out there to other people, and that you're still making content now for prisoners? I don't know who wants to start with that. Really got a question.
I can try and start. So with Koestler, yeah, it's true. I absolutely, you know, the work that we receive is just huge volumes of entries to the Koestler Awards, and every single piece has got an important story to tell. And sometimes the context that the work has been made in, I know that some, you know, an audience member might find, you know, that is part of perhaps why they find the work interesting. So I suppose sometimes I'm mindful of that, and I think that sometimes the content, the fact that this has been made in prison, does actually make the piece even more moving, more poignant. You can kind of, if someone's poem expresses the feeling of loneliness or isolation from family really well, then then obviously knowing that the person's in prison does give it a specific context and does make it more interesting. But yeah, you do want to be careful that it doesn't become kind of some sort of fascination that the audience might have. I think sometimes that part of that is to do with just if a work is really is moving and is of a really high standard, then I would think most of our audiences, most of the time, I hope, do kind of appreciate, well, this is actually a brilliant work, and this is a work that I wouldn't have been able to experience without, you know, Koestler, I guess, acting as an intermediary. And I think it's another reason why we do change. I mean, we do it because it would be repetitive otherwise, but also it's having a sensitivity to how you treat other people's artwork, as I suppose any curator should do. So my role at Koestler, I'm the director of arts, it's very unusual for me to get to select work, much as I'd love to. It's very unusual for me to get to select work for specific things that we do. I guess my little bit of power is maybe thinking about who I do ask. And that, of course, that is power that I have there. So we have asked all different groups and types of person, people in different situations, individuals as well as groups. So we have invited people who are actually in the middle of serving sentences to curate our exhibitions. We've invited people who are on probation to curate shows. I've had Anthony Gormley as a curator. I next year will now have Camille Walala as a curator. And we've also, one of the best shows I think that we've done in recent years was curated by people who had a family member in prison. And I think that part of the thing that made that show so amazing was actually the additional sensitivity that those curators brought in, because each of them had a family member who had made art while in prison. Actually, it was quite specific. So yeah, it's something to be really like mindful of at all times. And then when I work with a curator, when we do manage to get a curator who is an artist or a musician, like Soweto Kinch last year at South Bank, you approach someone because you like their work and you've heard that they might be an interesting person to work with, and you think that it might work for them, and they might say yes and they might get excited. But you also you continue to pursue it once you've met them and you feel that they are gonna listen to the work and respond to the work and make choices that are sensitive. So it's yeah. And you kind of know that when you sit down to start to work with someone, even if they themselves have no experience of working in prison. So yeah, I get to enjoy working with a whole range of people with lots of range of experiences. But yeah, it is partly thinking about that, just thinking about who has that power, how things might be presented, and how they might be perceived by the public.
I'll just, I think in a way, I mean, Ali, you've presented on the radio, so, and I think you're probably the key person here. But just to answer the thing that you said about how our content it's not broadcast to the public. There are a couple of reasons for that. One which you mentioned was about sort of security and I guess sensitivities around, you know, victimhood and that sort of voyeuristic thing that could, and you know, the radio station could become a very voyeuristic thing if it was a radio station made in prison for the general public. But the other more important thing, I think, is that if we broadcast outside of prison, it would change what people said when they're in front of the microphone. Our radio station is not there for the public. Our radio station is there to support people in prison. and it's a really difficult time. And there are all sorts of people in prison, but the one thing we know that they all have in common is that most of them have been found guilty by a court. They've been judged by their peers in a lot of cases. They've experienced going into prison for the first time. They're all incarcerated. Most of them will end up being released. Some of them will never be released, but they all have this thing in common. And it's a mystifying system. It's a properly complicated, bureaucratic, mystifying system. And I've never been in that situation. And this is why I think Ali's the key voice here, because I think I would love to know I'd love to know firsthand what that is like to walk into a space where you have no idea what's going on. You probably don't know when you're going to be released. You don't know who can help you contact your family. You don't even know what time you're going to be unlocked from your cell, which has no handle on the door on the inside. I mean, it's a really weird situation to be in. And I think if I were in that situation, the idea of a voice on my television, a friendly voice on my television explaining to me what's going on, what's available, what Koestler do, what all these other things that happen in prison that you only find out about through word of mouth, and it's usually that sort of information usually isn't very accurate. That's the stuff we do. That's not relevant to the general public. We don't really care about the general public. What we care about is helping people who are in prison to survive that experience, and not only that, but to get through it in as positive a way as possible. Go on, Ali, that's your cue.
Yeah, sorry. It's quite an unusual thing to put into words. The fact that it is only broadcasted to other prisoners. Well, first of all, the fact that it's broadcasted to thousands of people. So even just being in a position where you're being listened to by thousands of other prisoners, it's a kind of unusual feeling. It was for me, because it's like you feel it's an important position. I feel like it's a really important position, especially on a show that's really popular. I felt like you had to kind of live up to the reputation it had and the standards it had, and a lot of people, it was their favorite show, the show that I was hosting. I felt like there was I wouldn't say pressure, but I had to kind of I knew that I was their source for a lot of music in general, but just their kind of connection to the outside world in a sense as well. It's where prisoners, when you're in prison, you can't listen to you can't. It's not like where you're at home, where you can just go on YouTube and just search for any song you want, and just kind of be connected in that sense. So where a lot of prisoners, if they want to listen to a certain song, for example, they would send in a request, and that would be their only way to even have any voice in terms of listening to what they want to listen to. So that I felt like that was basically an important role in that sense. We had the opportunity to get I could send a request onto staff who would basically download songs that prisoners are requesting. So it was like it was basically providing people with that peace of mind that music is really powerful, first of all. So if people are doing really long sentences, or if even shorter sentences, I feel like it's a really powerful tool in helping people get in the right mind state, more than just passing time. I feel like there's a lot of songs that are sentimental to people, and they hold it in a special place. So it is the fact that we're being listened to by these prisoners who are restricted in so many different ways. It's like their one opportunity to kind of reach out to someone who's in the same situation as them, who can relate to them, who's been through exactly what they've been through in a lot of in a lot of the senses, been through the same situation, and who can basically just accommodate them with that peace of mind and that basic just that opportunity for them to just make life a little bit more easier for them, and for them to have that little bit of pleasure to just tune in and also have the opportunity to interact with the people at NPR. Even let's say people that are outside, it's not really it's not that, I don't know if a lot of people really phone into radio stations and kind of request songs or even communicate with the hosts of the show. I've never done it myself. I've never called up Kiss 100 or Capital or whatever and requested a song or even had a chat with the host. And even if I did, they live completely different lives to me. So I feel like the fact that prisoners can literally just send a letter to NPR and they can have their say, which they can send a little message in. They can literally, like, they have the opportunity to let their voice be heard. So it was like it's something that not a lot of people do it, but I've personally not done it, and I know a lot of other people haven't interacted with radio stations outside. And when they're inside, if you send a letter to NPR, it will come through to us, and we will try and play the song that you asked for, or at least read out the message that you sent to us. So you will have your say, and it will come through to someone who can relate to you and who's been through exactly the same thing as you. And I feel like that's really powerful, and it gives them a platform just to be heard.
Ali, sorry to cut you off, man. I just wanted to jump in because I was curious. Did you have experience of working in this industry before you went to Brixton?
Never the radio industry. Never anything to do with broadcasting or even when it comes to production for radio. I literally learned everything just before I got into NPR in prison, basically. So it's all new to me in that sense.
What did that do for just, things like mental health and self-confidence because I think it's a fair assumption to make it's probably a difficult time when you get put into a prison, but then seeing this quite visible and attainable opportunity that was presented to you, what did that do for you?
I felt like it was a blessing. Obviously it was just before, in terms of the fact that I was in prison, which was obviously, I'm sure a lot of people can agree with me, it was like one of the worst times in my life, just serving a sentence and not having your freedom. But to have one of your most biggest passions just available to you, it felt like a moment of freedom. It's something that I would have loved to have done outside. It was like an ideal kind of career path that I would have tried to follow if I had the opportunity outside. So for me to be able to do that while I'm at my lowest point, it helped out so much in mentally and in terms of just bringing happiness to me. It helped, it just made me it made me really happy, to be honest. And also the fact that it gave me the opportunity to do something that I would have never had the chance to do outside, with about the required qualifications or the required kind of experience. It really
it's kind of strange how like it, in a weird way, it sort of like set a level playing field. It's sort of like just like a reset again for you to be able to like chase these opportunities that you didn't have the, like you said, like the qualifications or whatever else for it before. So like, you know, on Tuesday's talk, we talked a lot about prison as like a system of harm, right? And I guess we were curious about how arts and education help to remedy that for people within the system. And I think that's a bit more of an open question for everybody to sort of like discuss between themselves as well, because I know that there's radio and art making are quite diverse in that sense. So maybe I wanted to share a few opinions between yourselves and have a discussion there.
Yeah, well, as far as me, I feel like just if you're like you said, if you're kind of being punished, you're kind of you're serving out your punishment, which is your sentence basically. If you ever have the opportunity to do something creative, to express yourself, I feel like it's just a gateway to freedom within the environment that you're in. While you haven't got your freedom, it's a way to kind of express yourself. It's a way to do, if it's something that you haven't even done outside and something that you would have loved to do. It's obviously a great opportunity, and it can really make you really feel really good at your lowest time. Yeah, so I feel like it was.
Somebody just popped into the chat, which I think is quite an interesting quote. It's like it is presenting opportunities for self-discovery and self-challenge whilst you're in there.
Yeah, it is, because yeah.
Can I slightly politicize that question? Like, obviously, I think that arts, education, creativity in prison is absolutely critical, and I wouldn't have done the project that I did if I didn't. But I suppose to politicize that, like, I think it's noticeable that the organisations delivering these are charities, you know, so those things sit outside what the prison service does, and like, is that right? You know, that we have this system, and then these other organisations kind of making life a bit better for prisoners. You know,
I'll just very briefly say something about that. I think that's a really important question. I mean, I don't really want to betray my personal opinions about the merits or otherwise of the prison system, but what I would say is that, yeah, we're charities. We're not completely detached from the prison service. We were given permission. We were asked by a prison governor in 2007 to go into Brixton Prison to deliver something that would benefit the prisoners there. You know, a very enlightened governor, and most prison governors are very enlightened people. Most prison governors work every day in prisons, and they know what's what. They know what life is like on a wing. You know, they know it in all its filth and dirt. And so that governor who invited us in saw in this creative pursuit an opportunity to do all those things that Ali has just described. And then further, we've received an enormous amount of support from civil servants within the Ministry of Justice to help us get to where we are today. You know, it wasn't just us that got us into onto the wings of 80,000 people. You know, that was a big operation, and a lot of investment, and the prison service invests in us just as other organizations, other charitable trusts invest in us. So we're not entirely detached from the prison service. And I think whatever you think about whether prisons should exist and what they should be doing, I think it's really important to acknowledge that if it wasn't for people within the prison service who had a bit of foresight and imagination, I think probably Fiona would say the same thing. You know, it takes work to coordinate this sort of an operation, particularly on a national scale.
Yeah, the prison service is just, obviously it's huge. And we also work with the Scottish Prison Service and the Northern Ireland Prison Service, so they're separate again, also big bureaucratic organisations. And absolutely, like, it's so Koestler, just like Prison Radio, and probably as your project as well, Ruth, we couldn't do what we do if we weren't, well, we're given permission, but we're given a lot more than that. We actually receive some funding. We have to apply for a grant, and we're up against other people. But if we get it, then we receive funding from Ministry of Justice, a small, like, part of our funding. We obviously fundraise. But the main thing is the prison service allows us to do what we do. They don't allow anyone to go and work and communicate with prisoners and to send them certificates and actually to make cash payments, which causes every finance department in every prison, you know, that's their time processing them for prisoners. So they actually do help us in many ways do what we do. And the other thing that happens in prisons is that they all have libraries. Often they're run by the local council. And then they also have, it's all very, you know, it's lots of compartments. Then there's the education provider. And that is, of course, that is kind of all funded, you know, through all the different ways, but through the prison service. Those are not charities. And those art teachers that work for those education providers, or English teachers, we wouldn't reach most of our participants in terms of, especially new people, and maybe the people who need us most. So people who are really kind of sitting with a blank sheet of paper, they don't know what to do. Their art teacher, who's in a position funded completely by the, you know, through, as it drips all the way down through the government, through the Ministry of Justice. So those art teachers are pretty crucial to what we do. If they weren't, you know, if they weren't there, we would get way less participation from people who are maybe less confident. We'd probably get work from all the people who've already entered and love Koestler and would continue to do so. But in terms of reaching the people that probably need us the most, that's a lot of that's to do with enthusiasm of art teachers. And yeah, we exist. We try to exist very much, you know, with support wherever we can get it through the Ministry of Justice and all the different people that work there. Governors who basically will have a huge amount of power in each individual prison are really crucial. And some governors are passionate about people being creative in prisons. Not all, but some, and I mean many. So last year we did a project with Wormwood Scrubs where we did a music project with prisoners that built to a performance, and it was part of the London Jazz Festival. Huge if you looked at it really negatively, you know, if you just were really bureaucratic, huge inconvenience to Wormwood Scrubs prison, and then the prison press office, huge amounts of work that I caused them in order to do a thing that that we think was brilliant for the men who were involved. But they still did it. They did do it. So it's Andrew and I guess we see that all the time. We see how it's all about individuals. So some prison officers, I've got to say, do encourage people to enter work to Koestler. I'm not saying every single prison officer does, but a lot of entrants actually get their Koestler awards entry signed off by a prison officer, and sometimes it's because that prison officer saw that person alone with, you know, loads of drawings piling up around them and said, you know, have you thought about do you want to share them with anyone, because there's this organization that does it. So it's all about people, isn't it, and individuals. I guess prison governors, the people who work within prisons, people in the Ministry of Justice, they all exist to kind of do actually what the public asks them to. And I think it's in behind the doors, they do experiment with so many different projects, you know, theatre, music, radio, TV. There is a lot going on behind the scenes in prisons. Some of it gets seen.
I wanted to jump in with actually what might be a really difficult question. And it's something that is informed by some of the things we were discussing on Tuesday once again. One of the questions we also posed to them was that by doing projects in prison, are we supporting the system? And John, who was one of the speakers, explained to us that there is valuable work to be done within prisons, but it always has to be borne in the mind that the point and objective of the work is to empower prisoners and collectively empower them, which I think is something we can unanimously agree on. But from this, it got me thinking that the point of prisons, I don't know if I should make an open comment about the point of prisons, but like the idea is that like we shouldn't have prisons as in the case of I don't know how to word this question. I think it's a bit difficult, and it might be something that I come back to. But essentially, I think I was trying to articulate that if we started to move forward as a society and it became less and less of a case that prisons cease to exist, more and more of a case that prisons cease to exist, or the prison structure itself was completely reformed or changed entirely, how comfortable are you as organizations with that your organizations may have to close in regards to that? And it's quite a difficult question, and I'm aware of that, but I just want to hear your thoughts about it.
I don't think that's a difficult question. I would be very happy if we didn't have to exist.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think ultimately we're sharing brilliant artwork that people wouldn't normally see, and stories that people wouldn't normally see, and we're helping to empower people by getting them shared. If those people were not there, if there had been less victims of crime, that's fine. I can go and, you know, do something else. Ultimately, we shouldn't. Yeah, we as an organization, we're you're right. Yeah, I mean, obviously, if the prison population went down, you could ask me, am I worried that I'll not get as much artistic output from people in the prison, you know, and will I be out of a job? But I would probably say that, you know, if the prison population went down, then I think that the remaining people are still going to be creative and want to share their stories, and I'd probably find it easier to find those people. But yeah, absolutely, we don't want more victims of crime. We want less. So and we don't want. And we're trying to break down barriers that are stopping people being able to share their stories. If those barriers are not there, then that's excellent. Yeah.
The abolitionist position that came up, that was discussed on Tuesday, was this idea that, you know, if like restructuring society so that we're not thinking about punishment, so that you're not having a system where Black and minority ethnic people are overrepresented. You know, it was so fascinating to hear about abolitionism coming from like Black feminism, from responses to people seeing how lives are shaped, and you know, so that where am I going with this? Oh yeah, I was sort of, to form that into a question, I wondered, you've maybe touched on it a bit, but I wondered if you feel like the work you do is kind of buffeted by political opinion and public opinion. And maybe Andrew, quickly first, because I know you've got to head off in a minute.
Yeah,
right?
I've got 5 or 10 minutes, so I can stick around for a bit. I think, are we buffeted by public opinion? Yes and no. I mean, we have been going for 13 years. Fiona's organisation has been going for many, many more. We've existed we came in under a Labour government. We've survived the coalition. We're still here. So I think the prisons are never particularly high up on the agenda that politicians don't really want to talk about prisons. It's a bit of a dirty secret. There are no votes to be won by advocating reform of prisons. And there are a lot of things that go on in prisons that I think people would be really rather alarmed about if they thought about them properly. I think there are a lot of people in prison who absolutely shouldn't be, and I don't think it's a very effective way of reducing reoffending. And I think data over decades and decades will back that up. I forget the percentages. Fiona, you probably know them better than I do, but a lot of people who've been in prison end up going back to prison, and a lot of crime is committed by people who have already been through prison. But I think, in a way, the abolitionist argument, that this whole debate, I feel like it's a bit of a red herring, because it's perhaps a utopian vision. I don't think it's achievable. I don't even know if it's necessarily desirable. But the more important thing, and this is a little bit, this I find quite sinister. Sentencing for very, very serious offences like murder, life sentences with a tariff. The average tariff for a murder has gone up very, very substantially over the last 40 or 50 years. So it used to be the case in the 60s and 70s that if you committed a serious murder and you were convicted, you might spend 10 or 12 years in prison. That would be an extremely harsh sentence. Now, 20 years plus is kind of the starting point. Some people stay in prison for 40, 50 years. Some people, a very small number of people, serve a whole life order. People don't really know this. People don't really know the historical context of sentencing. And I think what happens in the courts and the trends in sentencing are far more worrying than this argument about whether prisons should exist or not. I think it's quite a superficial argument, to be honest, because you've got people who will commit a very, very serious crime, and then another person who's committed a very similar crime but has different characteristics might receive a very different sentence. So there's an awful lot of chaos around sentencing, and you're talking about people's lives. So I think that is where we should be looking, not wondering about whether we should be abolishing prison or not. I think that comes later.
There's I recently watched a short film that had been made. I can send you the link after when I can remember the name of it. Up in Scotland, and it was a film made by men who were on community sentences. So they hadn't gone to prison. They had been given a community order. And it was about that and the benefits of having actually received that community order. And the men had devised a script, and it was acted, I think, mostly by a mixture of professional actors and actors who were not professional. And it was really interesting. So it was just looking at the alternatives to prison for certain crimes, obviously, for crimes where it was a possibility to do that. And the fact that then the family relationships didn't completely break down, so therefore the person was actually less likely to commit another offence. So it was an interesting film, and obviously, like for example, Koestler, we happily work with people who are on community sentences, so they didn't actually go into prison. And if we could work with more people because it shifted in that way, all the better. The same with youth offending teams. That's young people who are not necessarily in the prison. They're serving their community order in the local community. So obviously there's other ways, and it's part of kind of making sure people understand that it's not easy to have a community order, for example. It's not necessarily the lighter option. It's just it can have less ramifications in certain aspects of people's lives, and it can be more impactful in stopping there being more victims of crime, which is what presumably we all would like.
There's a criminologist called Ben Crew, who's at the University of Cambridge, who writes really, really interestingly about sentencing and the effectiveness of sentencing and the the disparities in sentencing. So he's a very good starting point. Ben Crew.
So coming off from sentencing, another topic that I wanted to talk about was overrepresentation of Black and ethnic minorities, or just particularly marginalised groups within prison. And we all know that those groups are extremely largely overrepresented within the prison system right now. Do you also feel that representation, or overrepresentation, I guess, in the artists and creatives that you work with?
At Koestler, for example, we do monitor that, because it's something that we've, obviously for quite a long time now, we've been concerned about. Are we working with a diverse range of the prison population? And we do look at the statistics for the prison population, so that we know what we're comparing things. So we find that our entrants are pretty much representative of the prison population, but there's definitely always work to be done, because as soon as you do workshops in a specific prison and people self-select to be in a workshop, etc., it's something, if you're running a project in a prison especially, that constantly needs kind of questioned, because we would like to represent the prison population, and I know that prison population is skewed, basically, isn't it? We know that from things like the Lamy report a few years ago. So but we kind of measure ourselves against what we know about the prison population.
And another thing that was more coming off from Ali's introduction, actually, about an hour or so ago now, but when he was talking about the types of music that he's more interested in working with. So Lisa White, who's a criminologist, on Tuesday was speaking to us or educating us about this idea of the gang matrix, which was a situation where the police were building networks that were primarily of young Black and Asian men, used to network their associates. There would be networking people that would appear in music videos. So gradually the police were building up a database for intelligence simply about who you might be hanging out with. That was called the gang matrix. But when you actually looked at it and really dissected it, it was almost entirely targeting Black and Asian men, and it wasn't targeting as much serious youth violence by young white men. So it was already organized in a structurally racist way. And it got me thinking about the intersections of culture and criminality. So rap and grime culture, and I guess this is something that I want to hear Ali's thoughts a little bit more on, about the associations between like street and urban culture, and how that's consistently stereotyped with people of color and then criminality. So Ali, do you have any thoughts on that?
I know what you're talking about. For example, something that's been kind of brought up a lot recently is the genre of drill music. I know a lot of drill artists have been kind of targeted for the content of their music, and I don't think it's like a black and white kind of answer when it comes to the actual content of the music and whether it influences crime, because I'm kind of split on that in a sense, because I know that music is really powerful. I can even relate to that, in the sense that when I was young, and I used to listen to certain songs and certain artists, it can kind of like, I wouldn't say manipulate, but it can kind of like glorify certain things that ain't ideal, to say the least. And a lot of young people are impressionable, even older people, and I feel like music has that power to have, well, it has the power over certain people to maybe mold them into either copying what they hear, or just kind of for them to kind of strive to live a similar lifestyle to the people that they listen to or their favorite artists, etc. But then again, I feel like that's the same in any type of media, in a sense as well, because before drill come about, there was grime, and they said the same about grime. Before grime, there was back in the 90s when the whole kind of gangster rap era was about. They said the same about that. And to be honest, over the years, there's always been crime. There's always been knife crime. There's always been violence. And I wouldn't say the introduction of certain new genres has made it drastically different. So I feel like I'm a bit split on that. I feel like it's not a straight. I can't really give a straight answer on that, but I can kind of sympathize with both sides of the argument when it comes to that. And in terms of the what you said about ethnic minorities being targeted for the specific genres of music, I feel like it's kind of weird, because in urban music, let's say for example hip hop, grime, and drill, there's a lot of respect for authenticity. So if even though there's a bunch of artists that are completely making up the contents of their music just for the sake of just to be creative, or maybe they might use a lot of metaphors, or they might just be telling stories, or they might just be talking about what they've seen, or they might just be exaggerating things that they say. But for example, when they talk about violence in certain songs, they might be exaggerating it just in a musical sense. So I feel like I lost my train of thought for a second. Yeah, so basically, when it comes to the kind of targeting certain kind of genres of music for the content of the music, I feel like there is, when it comes to police, they have to do a job, and if people are talking about a certain content that is seen as evidence, that it can be seen as more than just music. It can be seen as like this person has a history, or let's say for example someone has a history of offences, and they rap at the same time, and they're talking about stuff that has literally showed up on their rap sheet in the past in real life. They may have been sentenced for certain activities that they're actually rapping about. I can understand police pursuing the route of kind of investigating their music and maybe trying to bring that up in court, because they can see the correlation between what they're kind of mentioning in their music and maybe their lifestyle or their past offences. So I can understand police trying to use that approach to find evidence, but at the same time, you're right. There is, whether it's down to the fact that there may not be as many young white urban kind of musician compared to black musicians, and even there's a lot less Asian urban musicians, I'd say. But I know the black community has been targeted a lot in like you mentioned the gang matrix and stuff like that. So I can understand that it can be seen as kind of profiling, racial profiling in that sense, because they are being targeted for like they are being targeted because the police feel like they're going to find answers in pursuing investigating their music, for example, when in rather than kind of treating everyone the same, and for example. But so if whether it's the volume of music being made by certain ethnicities, I feel like it's a kind of a weird balance where police they could either ignore everything that's being said, or they could kind of dig deeper into certain things and kind of see if they can find answers in it. So I feel like it's a really touchy subject, and it's hard to kind of find a straight answer to.
Yeah, I don't think it is a subject really with like an answer. It was just interesting to see your thoughts. So like I'll just check the time, and we're like 5 minutes to 7, and I'm conscious that Andrew might have to run in a second. So Andrew, if you do need to, feel free just to sign out from the talk. But we just had a few questions pop in, and I thought maybe we could finish off just by answering some of these. So one of these was from Colette. It was interesting to hear from Ali what working with NPR meant to him. Can Ali or Andrew share further thoughts on or comments on the impact that working with or just having access to NPR has on individual prisons? And Andrew, Andrew, do you often work with prisoners on delivery or presenting of shows? So
yeah, I'll answer that really quickly, and then I will have to go. But thank you very much for having me. So we yes, we work with prisoners on the delivery and presenting of shows. We train in production techniques, microphone skills, scripting techniques, interview skills, all these sorts of things. Working in a radio station delivers an awful lot of transferable skills that you could use in any walk of life. So that kind of the professionalism that our team brings with us is extremely important. And I think the first bit, which was about the impact on listeners, I guess, we don't claim to reduce reoffending on our own, and I think anyone who does claim that is probably, well, they're being disingenuous. I think what we can do is measure the way people the way people view our service and the way they interact with it. We're not looking for passive listeners. We're looking for active listeners. We want people to hear things on our station and then take action as a result of hearing it. I've got this, I haven't set this up, but I've got a massive sack of letters from our listeners here just down next to me, and this is just a tiny fraction of them. We get over 10,000 letters. We got over 10,000 letters from our listeners last year. It's the only way people can contact us, or it was back then. The very fact that people have heard something on our radio station and have taken the trouble to write a letter to us. Sometimes it's just a shout out. Sometimes they'll write 10 pages, which tells us their life story. All of that stuff goes into our shows. I think Ali talked about that earlier on. So the content that we deliver is generated largely from what our audience says to them. And I would be very interested to know what Ali thinks. He said he'd never rung a radio station before. I've rung a radio station before, or texted and been mentioned, and it's like a proper buzz, and it's pathetic because it's just someone in another room saying your name down, but it's a buzz. And I think that if you imagine that buzz in the context of being locked in a cell, and having you know, and your thoughts being given this kind of weight through being broadcast to the country, I think that's a big deal. So yeah, we do have an impact on our listeners. I'm very confident of that.
I don't think it's pathetic. Like those, when you're, I mean, I grew up in a small town which felt far removed from any kind of like culture and media, and like the idea of having any sort of impact or being part of it felt very remote, you know. And then compare that with being incarcerated and being absolutely, you know, shut off from the world, and then having your your name heard, your voice heard, like something back to you. I think it's brilliant. To be recognised and included in culture and be making culture. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Should we ask the last question?
Yeah, there's a final question here. I don't know if you want to take this one or prefer me to take it.
Go ahead.
I found what Andrew was saying about the bureaucratic, mystifying nature of the prison system really interesting. I think many people do find the culture sector equally mystifying and bureaucratic at times. How have you all found it's been bringing these two mammoth sectors together, and have you found many people in the prison system have lost their faith in both sectors? I think I'd like to hear Fiona's thoughts on this, actually.
Yeah, oh gosh, yeah, that's a brilliant question. I think nothing is more bureaucratic than all the prisons and all the types that we work with, but I completely get it. Yeah. I've worked at Koestler for 11 years, just over 11 years. And when I first started, Koestler was only doing a small amount of public exhibition. We didn't really do any publications or events, and we were just doing one annual UK showcase. And my specific job when I started was to do more. And I had some really crazy targets for like the first 6 months, as you do when you start a new job, and you go, yeah, okay, yeah. And it was so hard, and for maybe the first like 3 or 4 years, and I'm sure it's got easier partly because we've become a bit better at what we do, we've become better known, and we have, once you build up partnerships, you can talk about them. But I definitely feel that the cultural sector is more receptive to what I ask now than they were 11 years ago. So I definitely approached venues, museums, asking about maybe partnering 10, 11, 9 years ago, and, you know, just got nothing at all back ever, or a really mystified kind of email back being, we don't do this kind of thing. And now there is more of a will on the behalf of museums, galleries, to work with a more diverse, to showcase diverse voices, or voices that aren't getting heard otherwise. I think it has shifted in terms of the will. There's quite a growth in some museums and galleries are doing things that they just weren't really doing a lot of. I mean, I'm sure it happened, you know, even 20 years ago, but not as much at all. Kind of artists in residence, taking workshops into prisons, making kind of opportunities available. So that has all, I think, improved, partly because the arts have changed a bit, partly maybe the public, what they expect has changed a bit. And I think there's more recognition. There's loads of work to be done, but there is more recognition in more arts venues, that they're not always reaching everyone in their local community. You should be, I think, encouraging all families to come and see your free exhibitions that are paid for effectively by the taxpayer or people that buy national lottery tickets. So, who were like many, you know, if prisoners aren't getting to take part, then if they're in the local community, then I think that's a negative. And that I think that feeling is not, that is more thought, kind of more of a common thought now for people that work in the arts. But there's loads of work to be done, because I know that sometimes, you know, employment, for example, we do an employment project. We employ people to host our South Bank exhibition. It's for all, the criteria really to get the job is that this is pretty much your first role. You after being in prison, this is going to make a big impact on your life. We train people, we support people. Many of those people will go on into their next page role, and quite a few in the arts, but there's still lots of barriers. There's lots of barriers to employment if you have a criminal conviction, even if it's not relevant at all to the role that you're applying for. And there's a lot of, you know, stigma, and I know that it's really difficult for people when they go for a job interview and they have to discuss, you know, that gap in their CV. And even if it's not relevant to the role, there's a lot of challenges there. And I think that I have met people who that, you know, it has become incredibly disheartening, and I felt disheartened too, because I've maybe worked with someone, encouraged them to feel that the arts is something that person has, of course, a valid contribution to make to. That person I know then has gone on and got paid and voluntary work experience, and I think that person should then be able to go on. But I have definitely seen people, and I felt disheartened too when they've not been able to get on further. And it's often to do with employing people who've had a conviction, but it can be other things as well. It can be really frustrating job advertisements or volunteer advertisements where you've got to have, you know, a certain type of education, and it's expected that you'll have something, and that equivalent couldn't work just the same. I find that really disheartening, and it's quite common. And I think that, and that actually can also happen with college courses and university courses. Although quite a lot of work is being done, it can still happen with not just applying for a job. It can happen applying for college courses. So it's I think there's a lot of work to still happen there.
Thanks so much for that answer. We've just gone past 7 o'clock, so it is unfortunately the end of the talk. I wanted to thank everybody for speaking today. And just before we go and I sign off, I just wanted to do a little plug for an event that we've got coming up on Friday the 11th of September. It's called It Takes a Decade, and another one called The Big Walk, which is an online screening and a publication launch, a collaboration with the Justice, Arts and Migration Network seeking to reframe contemporary articulations of the migrant condition with a focus on Moreton Hall Immigration Removal Centre and the lives within. And on that note, I'd like to say goodbye to you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much for inviting us.
No problem.
Thank you everyone so much for joining and taking part tonight.
It's been great.
See ya.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
guys.
bye.